3, 2, 1.
Olá, boa tarde. Estamos aqui hoje juntos com esse podcast em que vamos discutir questões importantíssimas de direito internacional sobre a guerra tarifária que assola tantos países hoje. Estamos aqui com duas convidadas internacionais, a professora Virginia, que é à minha direita, Virginia Georgieva, da Universidade Iberoamericana do México, e hoje pela manhã nós conversamos um pouco sobre o tema, em inglês, Weaponized Economic Interdependence, ou seja, a interdependência econômica em guerra, vamos colocar assim, né? E o aspecto que ela tratou é uma análise comparativa do cenário atual no México. E aqui na minha frente nós temos a professora Maphiri, da University of Cape Town, da Universidade de Cape Town, da África do Sul, e hoje pela manhã também tratando de um tema muito importante, que é Asymmetrical Trade Relations and Economic Coercion, ou seja, as relações de comércio assimétricas e a coerção econômica sob uma perspectiva da África do Sul. E aqui nós temos a professora Iliana, que é a nossa pós-doutoranda, que está aqui conosco nesse ano. Se quiser se apresentar, Iliana, por favor.
Yes, I'm happy to introduce myself.
Desculpem, só para a gente fazer essa pequena transição, como são pessoas internacionais, nós vamos passar agora para o inglês e creio que nós temos aí a legenda, né, automática para vocês todos poderem acompanhar. Então, sorry, Iliana, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for giving me the poll. So, I'm associate professor at the CEUB and a postdoctoral fellow, and I teach several courses here, and I'm happy to be with all of you and discuss our topic today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Please, next.
So, would like to have a conversation with you concerning the topics we have discussed in the morning, just so that we can have further questions, go a little deeper. Right now many countries have been suffering worldwide, including Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, and we are all facing a tough economic pressure from the U.S., right? Which can be seen as an effect of a weaponized economic interdependence. So just for our fellow audience to understand, a weaponized interdependence often implies using pre-existing commercial ties to inflict strategic damage. Here we call it tarifaço. Yes, it's known as big taxation, and it has intended to affect us, not only economically, but also in our domestic affairs, internal affairs, right? And it has been seen as an attempt to interfere in our internal affairs and our sovereignty. So, I'd like to start asking you a question. You can start, Virginia, if you like.
Okay.
At what point do regular trade arguments cross over and become economic blackmail? Is that considered playing dirty? And more importantly, how do trade deals like the USMCA address this kind of unfair pressure? Can they offer any real defense against that kind of unfair pressure?
Well, yes, weaponized economic interdependence has developed all over the world. And as you were saying, I'm coming from Mexico, and Mexico has been victim of weaponized trade practices from the U.S. As you were saying, the U.S. is using trade-related measures, particularly tariffs, but also no tariff barriers to trade, to exert pressure and to use economic force against Mexico to interfere in its sovereign choices regarding two particular aspects of Mexican domestic policy, drug traffic, particularly fentanyl traffic, and migration. This economic coercion obviously is a violation of the USMCA, which is Mexico's most important free trade agreement. The trade weapons or the tariffs, the unilateral increase in the tariffs is a violation of the agreement, but there is no prohibition in the provisions of USMCA to use tariffs as a weapon or to politically leverage tariffs to compel Mexico to change its policies. So the answer is no. USMCA does not offer any efficient legal remedy against the use of tariffs by the US as a weapon or as a geostrategic weapon.
May I follow up with
Of
this question?
course.
Yes, so you devote your recent works to this concept, to weaponized economic independence. And can you please explain to our listeners and who is watching our podcast, so how actually this concept have played out in North American context, and in what specific ways actually the United States exercises economic coercion towards Mexico, and do these practices, existing practice, right, fall with or outside of the trade agreement, and what are legal remedies that are available in these practices? Thank you.
Well, the US President Donald Trump was already a trade weaponizer since its first administration when he came to power in 2018. At that time, he only used the threat to use tariffs. He threatened Mexico that he will impose a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum if Mexico does not change its migration policy, and if Mexico does not convert itself in what is called a third safe country, if Mexico does not allow illegal migrants from the US to stay on its territory. And he had a lot of success because Mexico actually submitted to the US will in this sense, and changed its domestic policy and militarized its southern border, prohibiting access for migrants to the US, and became a third safe country. So following this success in 2018, when he came back to power in 2025, he had the same strategy. He used threat of tariffs. He said he would impose 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum if Mexico does not change its fentanyl and migration policy once again, obeying to U.S. interests in this field. But the difference now is that he actually imposed a tariff on automobiles and auto parts from Mexico, and this tariff had a dramatic effect on Mexican economy because the automobile sector is Mexico's main producing sector. As I was saying, there is no prohibition under the USMCA to use tariffs to coerce another state or to interfere in its domestic affairs, to alter, in some sense, its sovereign choices. But we can consider that economic coercion is a violation of a general principle of international law, which is a principle of non-intervention in states' domestic affairs, which is recognized in Article 2.7 of the UN Charter, in Article 19 of the OAS Charter, and there is a legal possibility to link USMCA's interpretation to general principles of law. Legally speaking, there could be a remedy under USMCA, but from a political standpoint, this is not possible, especially because the USMCA will undergo a revision or a renegotiation process in 2026, and it is very complicated for Mexico to file a complaint or a legal suit against the US, because there are too many economic interests and too many exporters, Mexican exporters, behind. So there might be some legal remedies, but for the moment, the strategy, politically speaking, was to cooperate with the US, to a little bit submit to the weaponizers' will, to seizure fentanyl, to cooperate with drug cartel leaders, extraditions, or illegal deliveries, in order to keep this very important trade relationship for Mexico. It's the most important one, because Mexico's 85% of its imports every year go to the US. It is impossible to to retaliate against economic coercion when you are so dependent on only one country's economy.
Professor Regina, I'm sorry, just a follow-up question. You're talking about the problem that we have talked about this morning, is the trade isolation, right? So could you tell us how Mexico is dealing, what it has been doing to overcome this trade isolation?
Well, Mexico is trying to, in some way, decouple its economy or de-risk its economy from the U.S. economy, but it is very difficult because all the cycles of Mexico's economy are aligned totally at the U.S. economy. We have a joke in Mexico, which is, when the U.S. sneezes, Mexico gets pneumonia. Yeah. So it's hard. But what Mexico is trying to do, and Brazil and many other countries are trying to do, is to diversify its export destinations. Mexico is looking to Asian countries. He's trying to establish new relationship even with Brazil. We were seeing this morning that the free trade agreement Mexico-Brazil, the bilateral one, will be modernized and maybe amplified. So one of its strategies has been to diversify, to go to other countries, to trade with other countries. Unfortunately, it will take maybe decades for Mexican exporters to learn to trade with other countries. The proximity with the US, the fact that the transport is very cheap, has created strong relations even between Mexican and US companies that will difficultly be broken or changed. Another strategy was to increment the country's economic self-sufficiency, to produce more things domestically, to promote the reliance, the economic reliance on Mexico's own economic capacity. So there was a constitutional reform which proclaimed Mexico's food sovereignty. Mexico restricted import of genetically modified corn from the US for some time. So now we want to produce all our food and to consume domestically, and there are all the times in the media, no, Mexican products are the best products. Our avocado is the best avocado, which is true. But yeah, so it has been food self-sufficiency, energy sovereignty. We are undergoing a very deep reform of the energetic sector. The state is trying to control more the production of energy, to depend less to the US. But once again, these are difficult strategies because we are politically very vulnerable to the US superpower. I mean, we are the southern neighbor of the hegemonic power in decline. It is not an easy position.
Following up your word, the reform, just a very small follow-up question. Given the current challenges, and you mentioned the reforms, what reforms actually do you think are necessary at the moment in Mexico? Yeah.
Well, I would agree, and many Mexican economists have said for decades that we need to diversify our export, and we were saying this morning we don't need to put all our eggs in the same basket. It is a dangerous strategy. Being economically dependent on someone, even in human relations, I'm thinking about women's rights. economic dependence is always a source of violence and of abuses. So diversify, it's a good option. I would not be in line with the Mexican government, who has seek to strengthen cooperation with Asia, with Asian countries. I would go Latin America. I would strengthen ties with Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, even Venezuela, although there are many problems. And Mexican foreign policy has always been under this pressure. Are we a North American country or are we a Latin American countries? And by entering in the USMCA and by having this very close relationship with the US, we turned our back a little to our Latin American partners. I would think Latin America as Mexico's most natural sphere of influence. In this sense, diversification. Then I'm completely in favor of most governmental industrial policy. There is a stronger intervention of the Mexican state in the domestic economy. The government has proclaimed the end of the neoliberal period of the Mexican economy. We are seeking some new balance between private power but also state regulatory power. We have major reforms in many sectors. So I'm also in favor of this new form of embedded liberalism. No, open markets from the outside, but state interventionism in the economy. Because Mexico, even if Mexico is a giant in international trade, it is the 13th country with more exports. Even if it is one of the largest economies, the benefits that free trade brought were not equally distributed. We have major problems of social and economic inequality inside the country. And I think we first need to arrange some internal economic problems and then go and sell our avocados to the rest of the world.
Wow. Well, let's integrate Professor Mikovhe into our conversation. Please, Professor Mikovhe, what can you tell us about your South African perspective? How have you been dealing? Yeah, the government has been dealing with this pressure that everybody has been feeling.
I think for developing economies, the experience is quite similar. The thing is, with international law, and actually when we're dealing with trade and tariffs, is that he who controls the network controls the terms. So when you are put in a vulnerable position of having a superpower like the US controlling terms through bilateral agreements or stuff like that, what happens is that most developing economies like South Africa are now put in a place to concede to the terms of the tariffs because we don't want to lose a big market like the US. But Africa has been looking at how do we move or look forward post the end of AGOA in 2025, in September 2025, and looking forward in terms of what does intercontinental trade through regional integration look like for developing economies in Africa through the AFCTA. So it is very important for us to look at it in the context of saying that we cannot completely write off the US as of now, but it is important for us to diversify how we trade by not putting our eggs in the same basket. I think that is the biggest lesson that we have, I have taken home today from the discussions that we've been having from the different experts that we had in today's panel. From a South African context, I think it's also about realizing the fact that trade agreements have been for a very long time be used as a coercion tool just because of the asymmetrical relationship we have, where we have a superpower like the US and we also have a developing economy that is dependent to the US. South Africa has a trade agreement with the US for the exportation of poultry as well as citrus fruits, wines, other mineral resources that are being transferred to the U.S. So when you completely remove a big buyer like the U.S. or a big market like the U.S., it exposes our country to more problems of unemployment, more problems of job losses, more problems of loss in total GDP. So when we think about the trade wars that are actually happening now, is basically we need to understand that geopolitics is weaponized form of warfare through economic policy. So if the U.S. wants to influence policy in Africa, it can only do it through influencing tariffs and also through influencing policy through bilateral agreements. But then how do we move forward in a way that protects our sovereignty as a state? How do we move forward in a way that protects equality, fairness, and dignity, which is the cornerstone of our constitution? Is that we need to now look forward post-AGOA. Are we going to come up with an amendment bill that protects and maintains state sovereignty? Are we going to now look at trade as a tool for us to actually diversify how we distribute resources and not necessarily rely on a big superpower like the U.S.? And I think BRICS provides South Africa with a very great opportunity to diversify distribution, look for new markets. But South Africa is not ready to separate itself from the U.S., as is Mexico, as is Brazil. There's a lot of benefit in that regard. But however, a toxic relationship, like we jokingly mentioned this morning, is one where there is only one voice, and that voice is dictating the terms. Now, when we look at international law and some of the remedies that are available under international law, we had a very interesting discussion this morning to say, well, what kind of remedies can we get under the UN? What kind of remedies can we get through the World Trade Organization? Well, the World Trade Organization is there to oversee the administrations of tariffs, but not political tactics, not political strategies. It does not interfere in that. Is the U.S. using this particular gap to take advantage of developing economies and exert its power globally? Yes, one can say that, but this is not new. Tariffs have been the language of Donald Trump, especially the Trump administration, for a very long time. I think he is now really putting his money where his mouth is, as he always has. And I think for a lot of developing economies like the U.S., South Africa, Mexico, and other developing economies are starting to wake up and see we really need to diversify. And, as discussions are going on in South Africa about, okay, do we introduce an amendment bill post-AGOA or do we side with China? These are the kind of debates and the talks that we're actually having at the moment. They're actually quite important for trade, but it's also important for us to look into say what can we do as an African continent to improve regional integration, but not to improve it as a means to replace tariffs, because that is impossible, and that is not the solution. We don't have the systems, and it's not the correct way to go about it. Is can we diversify how we trade with the aim of being in a bilateral collective bargaining negotiation table that doesn't make us feel oppressed or that doesn't force us to buy products that are of a lesser quality, importing poultry from America, genetically modified chickens from America, when you can actually, produce organic ones in your own country, then you see that now it's all about power and influence. So I think the world order is changing, and in as much as we're looking at tariffs as a big crisis point, I think this is an opportunity for us to really play a role as developing economies on how we do business globally and also do business with countries who want to do business with us. I know it sounds like big talk because everybody doesn't want to lose their biggest client, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're, in any kind of business, you don't want to lose your biggest client. And fortunately or unfortunately, the U.S. is our biggest client, and we still want to maintain relationships without losing our sovereignty. How we do that remains a big point of contention.
You paid attention to remedies, right? And I would like probably to ask you the question, in your point of view, what are the current and effective legal and diplomatic, I would say, tools available to African countries to resist economic erosion from large economies, as you said, as the United States of America?
Well, I think the tools that are available through international law. We've got a lot of treaties in the UN, and we also have the World Trade Organization as a platform, and we also have African networks that are put in place to help defend trade issues, but they are not effective.
That's what we discussed. I'm sorry. That's what we
They are not
discussed
effective.
this
That's what we
morning.
did.
We were really a bit pessimistic about the power of law, the rule of law,
The rule of law,
and how the World Trade Organization is like it's not being applied. It's not an effective mechanism to deal with this kind of pressure. Right.
So we have the institutions, but they don't have the power. And like we spoke about this morning, it's the relationship between law and power, the rule of law and power. Where are we placing our value? And I think power is speaking more than the rule of law, because he who holds the power controls the law. So in essence, it also brings us to a place of being a little bit philosophical in terms of what is the role of public international law, especially in this kind of environment. What is the role of public international law in terms of influencing economic policy and geopolitics? And my colleague here, Professor Virginia, mentioned a very powerful point to say that it was more of a Pandora's box to say, does public international law actually have influence? And then she mentioned about the situation in Gaza. It's the same thing. We are dealing with similar problems, but we don't have the correct tools to actually solve those problems. Law is there, but is it effective enough to protect developing economies, especially with tariffs? Is it effective enough to protect the people of Gaza?
We feel powerless.
How should we then, by using what actually trade agreements or the tools, as you're saying, to counterbalance asymmetrical bilateral trade relations with African countries, relations in one which sides African countries. So how to counterbalance this asymmetry?
I think there's power in unity. And I think that's something that African countries have not fully explored. And we hope that through the AFCTA, there is an opportunity for us to integrate, not with the purpose of fighting tariffs as such, but there's power in solidarity. And if we're able to trade amongst each other and influence a lot of how resources are being moved and traded within the African continent, then I think it gives us a little bit of a seat in the table in a way that is meaningful. The AFCTA has over 54 states in South Africa, in Africa, who are part of it, but except for Eritrea, which is not part of it. So it gives us an opportunity to look at how do we create African solidarity through regional integration. But one of the biggest barriers or the limitation within the African context is that we do not have the proper systems to facilitate regional integration within the African continent. There's issues of infrastructure, there's issues of digital technology, systems of getting Wi-Fi connection networks, freight, railway systems that need to be put in place in order for us to effectively realize regional integration within the African continent, as well as we think about issues of harmonization. How do we harmonize different trade laws within the different African countries, and also how do we harmonize in a way that helps us to embrace African solidarity whilst we are still embedded with so much corruption in Congo, in Cameroon, in South Africa, in Malawi. How do we do that? So I think the first place to start for us to have a bigger voice within the bargaining table as an African continent is that we need to find a way to trade together, to trade amongst each other, to reduce border lines, to make it easier to travel within the African continent and also to do business with each other. I think that does not necessarily replace tariffs, but it gives us an opportunity to have a unified voice in the tables that matter.
I'm sorry, I just remembered that you told the regional trade doesn't replace the international trade.
No, but it doesn't. and tariffs does not equal charity. I think there's a lot that Africa has to offer, but when we talk about proper negotiation, we cannot talk about it without including principles of fairness, sovereignty of states, and justice. And I think for Africa that has been off the table for such a long time. And with the desperation of wanting to do business with bigger markets and economies like the US, there's been a lot of desperation that has came at the compromise of influencing economic policy. We jokingly mentioned this morning that it seems like tariffs are a different form of colonization, where there's a new age form of colonization to say, we may not colonize you in the same way that we were doing in the past, but we will impose tariffs that will make it very difficult for you to engage economically. Like Professor Virginia was mentioning earlier, this is the introduction of a new world order, but it is up to us to find ways to come together and diversify how we do business, how we trade, how we negotiate terms, how we do business internally as an African continent with each other. And also, if we are going to do BRICS, let's do BRICS. If we are not going to do BRICS, let's not do it, because I feel like we are swimming on both sides of the pond without necessarily making a decisive decision on what is our stance in the Ukraine war, what is our stance when it comes to tariffs, what is our stance when it comes to the US. For South Africa, I cannot say that we have to write off the US completely. Impossible. We need the US, but we need the US in terms that are fair and just. And if we cannot do that, then I think it is time for us to diversify.
What do you think, Professor Virginia? Do you think that the answer would be solidarity, diplomacy? What do you think are the perspectives for Mexico?
Yeah. Well, I think the perspectives of the Global South generally is to unite its strength and to be on one side in the struggle for a new balance of powers in international relations. And I think that we need a new international law for the emerging global economic order and in general for the emerging order, which will probably be multipolar or bipolar, China, the US. But the problem with most rules and institutions of international law is that they are like trapped in the past. We were saying that there can be legal remedies under the UN system. We were saying that economic coercion might be seen as a violation of Article 2.4 and Article 2.7 of the UN Charter, that we can legally imagine an activation of the UN Security Council and the collective security system. We can think about reforming the WTO. We can think about reforming its dispute settlement body, which is blocked by the Trump administration. But if you analyze the rules, for example, to modify the UN Charter, you need a positive vote of the 2/3 of all the members of the General Assembly, and you need the vote of all the 5 members of the UN Security Council. It is absolutely impossible to modify the UN Charter. So there are this kind of legal blockages in every institution. How can you amend the WTO founding treaty? You need a consensus. What is a vote by consensus? Everyone must agree, and the US and the other trade powers, like Russia, for example, have a veto power. So legally, it is very difficult, not to say impossible, to modify the functioning of the UN and of WTO to adapt these institutions to the new political realities or to the new balance of power in international relations. So I do think that I might be sounding like anarchic, but I do think we need to destroy the WTO and the UN, and we need to build a totally new global governance, totally new institutions, which will be based on the correct equilibrium of power, and where the BRICS country can have equal votes or equal power, or more or less equal power to the US. And we need to go back to multilateralism to escape from this growing unilateralism and to arbitrary use of political and economic power. We need to come back, maybe a new San Francisco conference. And we can see already emerging in the global legal landscape some new institutions that are BRICS leadered, like, for example, I was saying today, the BRICS Development Bank, the new Bank of Development of BRICS, like the Chiang Mai Initiative, which is more or less an Asian monetary fund, which is to compete with the International Monetary Fund. So we need new international institutions, new legal rules to govern the relations between states in the emerging global order. I think that we are near a constitutional moment, really a constitutional moment, like after the Second World War, when we need to build an entire new legal machinery, architecture, because otherwise, when a legal norm in every legal discipline, when it is not adapted to social relations, when it is caduced, bypassed by time, it cannot be efficient. No one will obey rules that are not corresponding to the social reality. And it's the same in international relations. We really need an international law, not war. Absolutely not.
Not a war, please.
An international law, which is accepted by BRICS countries, by the emerging powers. The problem is an empire to be destroyed. It can take a lot of time, and we are living in a period where the US is behaving like a bound animal, giving its last battle to survive and to preserve its global power. And international law it is Western European and US based, so we need to move international law from the West to a new direction, which includes South Africa, Mexico, India, Russia, and the emerging power poles.
And so paying attention to your last word. So what current reforms to international economic law would you address to prioritize asymmetry and economic erosion? It's my first question. And the second, due to the fact we are all here scholars, so what role should academic research and legal scholarship play in shaping future trade agreements and policies? Two questions.
I would start by the second question, which I think is easier. It's easier than the first one. What role for academic research and what role for law professors, like woman law professors around the world from the global south? Yeah. Well, academic research is very important. First of all, because it is apolitical. It is neutral in political terms. We're not defending here the interests of any party, of any president, etc. So we are kind of the critical eye of society. We have enough expertise to make arguments favoring one approach or another. Legal research is also very beneficial for society. There is a clear social benefit. Many rules of international law were once discussed in academic forums. Academics can make proposals for soft law instruments, international treaties, and somehow for influential academics, they can influence their governments. And especially because, as professor, we are responsible for producing and for do human resources, and many of our students then go to the foreign policy departments, became ambassadors, consuls. So it is an indirect influence, but I think it can be a very powerful influence in public policies. It is neutral, it is technical, good expertise, and it always seeks social benefit, not any personal kind of benefit. And we need to discuss all these issues as we are doing today, and we need to alert our students and the public in general about the dangers of taking decisions without thinking before. So we can help people to think about taking good decisions, and yes.
Yes.
Think before act.
Professor Mika, so just...
and I had the second question.
Yes, second
but
question.
If you want,
Yes, I
but
was
if you
waiting
want,
for
I
the
can-
second answer as well.
Sorry. Please go on.
What reform for international economic law to counter or to deter economic aggression or economic coercion? It is a very difficult question, but I have an answer.
Thank you.
If we go back to 1978, there was a declaration with big Mexican participation, one great Mexican foreign minister, Jorge Castañeda, and he proposed what is called the UN Declaration on the New International Economic Order. And there was a specific prohibition of economic coercion in all of its forms in the declaration. And it was not only economic coercion exercised by states, it was also economic coercion by multinational corporations. And what is the logic of this declaration, of the NEO declaration, the Declaration on New International Economic Order? It is to strengthen the economic sovereignty of developing states. I think the only way to deter economic coercion from developed states in all of its forms, it's to strengthen our own economic sovereignty. What was the vision of economic sovereignty promoted in the NEO Declaration? Well, permanent sovereignty over all natural resources located in states' territories. It was the right to regulate the domestic economy, to favor states' strategic domestic industries. It was the right to control the activities of multinational corporations within states' territories. And these rights are inherent to state sovereignty, and it was also a vision of equal economic sovereignty between developed and developing states, and a vision of global solidarity with developed states helping developing countries to achieve the same level of economic development. But most of all, it was a vision of what John Ruggie then called embedded liberalism. I think that the neoliberal period of global economy is over. I think that the invisible hand of Adam Smith did not bring equality and prosperity for the lot, but only for the few. And I think that we really need to escape from the myth of comparative advantages theories, etc. And we need a strong states domestically as a way to counter economic coercion. I think protectionism is not any longer a taboo. So I would put in the WTO more exceptions in favor of developing countries, in favor of sustainability, in favor of the protection of labor rights, which is already going with some free trade agreements, such as the USMCA. But yes, we need to remanage WTO to promote not only free but fair and state-controlled trade. Because when you put social affairs in private hands, we can see where we have arrived. We have auto-destroyed our countries, yes.
Thank you so much.
Professor Mikovhe, before you go on your answer, I'd like just to add a question to our scholars, right? If they're looking for any answer in compared studies, if you look to Brazil's reality, our reaction to the sanctions that we have suffered, do you think that Brazil can teach any lessons from our reaction, our diplomacy method, our sovereignty, struggle, defense? And the other question out, do you think that South Africa and Mexico could teach the world a lesson in the way you are responding to this struggles?
Well, this morning I had a very, very interesting Brazilian experience. We had, was it a minister? Is she a minister?
Daniela,
yeah.
Yeah, she's from the Minister of Exchange.
Yeah.
Foreign trade.
And
I'm not so sure.
Deputy.
Yeah, maybe we can double check that. But I was so impressed with her. One, she's a woman.
Yes,
she knows exactly
young.
what she's young. She knows exactly what she's talking about. And she speaks from a place not just of academic knowledge, experiential knowledge, but she's also very strategic in her communication in terms of this is what we are doing, this is what we are working on, and this is how we are trying to implement, this is how we are diversifying, this is how we are looking at, I hope I'm not mixing the two first speakers that spoke this morning. This is how we are looking at what each state within Brazil is able to produce and which state is dependent, is more dependent or independent from a Brazilian context. I think in terms of learning from Brazil, I think South Africa can really learn in terms of using young, brilliant people in positions of authority and power. It was so refreshing to see a woman who is not just a woman, but really knows what she's talking about, is very engaged in terms of what is happening, knows what is happening globally and what the strategy is for Brazil. It was a privilege and very refreshing for me to see that context. I think in terms of South Africa, we are very laid back in terms of what our ministers are doing to actually come up with strategies or systems of how to deal with issues of tariffs. We're very old people. Who I'm not sure about the political climate in Mexico. I wouldn't want to speak for it, but I felt so inspired this morning to see.
That's refreshing.
Yes, to see a woman who's on the front line.
Very good feedback, right?
Yes.
From the government.
Yeah, to see a woman on the front line who really knows what's going on, who understands, the tariff issue and what it means for Brazil economically, what it means in terms of the people of Brazil, the potential to lose their jobs, and what real tangible strategies they're actually putting in place. And the fact that we have institutions like this that are having this kind of debates and actually opening the door to government and people in ministry to come and have a voice in academic debates. Like she mentioned earlier, what role is it for academics and so forth? Yeah, I think we have a big role to play. So there's something beautiful about academics and academia, and it's called academic freedom. And it's also beautiful in that we have so much power because we've got the power to influence narrative. And I think through social media and the news and media, we have felt powerless for a very long time. But when I walk into the classroom and I've got plus minus 400 students and I can capture their imagination for just 1 hour, I feel like the most powerful woman in the world.
That's true.
It's true. I feel like
That's
the
true,
most
that's
powerful woman in the world because I'm not just looking at numbers. I'm not looking at clients. I'm not just looking at quotas. I'm looking at the future president of South Africa. I'm looking at the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'm looking at someone who, or people who can sit in positions of power, and I'm influencing their decisions, not necessarily by what I'm saying, but how I'm leading them to think, not saying what they actually want to hear, and sometimes being a little bit controversial, because the academic space is a place of learning, is a place of boldness. And I think because of cancellation culture, the fear of being cancelled, the fear of being too political, we have had our voice shrunk for a very long time. We want to be politically correct, we want to be diplomatic, but I think that academic space is not for that. I think it is for bold, critical thinkers with big ideas, with very strong opinions that we can engage with, through our journal publications, our books, our articles, our opinion pieces. We do have a voice, and we do have a power to influence narrative. And I think it's actually bigger than sometimes how we can think of it because of the whole profession, at the administration part of the work, the teaching, the research, the supervision. We do have a lot of power. And I think that opportunities to engage as academics at this level, I'm seated in a table in Brasilia with beautiful women from all over the world. 50 years ago, we wouldn't have had this opportunity to even have a voice to speak about issues relating to trade. But we are speaking about these things, and we are influencing legal minds because we are lawyers and we are teaching lawyers. And these legal minds have the potential to influence policy, business, and so forth. So I think academia has a huge place to play. I'm not writing myself off. and I try to create that environment in my classroom, and also even with my team, to say in what ways can we do research and have controversial conversations on issues like tariffs. We do have a voice, and it's a big, strong voice.
It's so beautiful. I'd like to stress that here in UniCEUB as well.
Yeah.
We have this kind of environment that we feel free to speak and debate. And it's amazing to be here with you this afternoon and share our experience. It's been really, really great. I'd like to thank you so much. I'm not sure if Iliana has any other questions, and if you want to add anything.
I would just say something about Brazil.
Yeah.
I really think Brazil is a leader in not only in Latin America, but at the global in the global order, and I think it has a lot. It is giving a good example to many developing countries. For example, if we take its relation with Russia. And with China and with the other parties of the BRICS group, Brazil is privileging diplomacy over unilateralism. It is also privileging diplomatic means of settlement of disputes. Its foreign policy is very pragmatic in many ways. And today I learned more about the Plan Soberano, which I think is a very good measure to think more about Brazilian firms and how to help them to deal with El Tarifazo and all the other pressure which the U.S. government is putting on them. And I think Brazil has learned the lesson about how to be a global player in global politics, but privileging beyond all the interests of its citizens and of its own companies. And I think that the tax issues and struggle against the job losses that trade wars are provoking, it's a very socially responsible politic. I would greet to think of your people and medium and small enterprises to protect your own domestic capacity.
So that's it?
Yes,
Thank you so much
It was
again.
honor really to meet you and to ask you all the questions and hear your opinions, you know. Thank you so much.
It's really, really nice, enriching, and thank you again. It was great having you in the morning, and now that we could have this straight talk, and thank you so much, really. Hope to have you back.
Obrigada, yes.
Soon.
Então, vamos encerrar. Muito obrigada pela audiência de todos vocês. Esperamos encontrá-los num próximo podcast. Até logo. Acho que precisamos dele desligar o botão.
Thank you.
Obrigada, meninas. É isso.
Tatiana, I was thinking to take a photo, yes?
Yes.
Yes, like in the team.
Many photos.
No, here, I will ask this.
Quanto tempo?
Foi. Nossa, 1 hora.
Como